What's up, guys? I was reviewing some like programming schemes and stuff like that, so I came across this thought process. Not so much, but it kind of made the dots easier to connect, in my opinion, when it comes to talking about form. So just reviewing the Texas method. If anybody knows about it, great. If not, you can look it up. But as the explanation went on, it's talking about technique and form breakdown at the end of a set or hard set, especially like the heavy volume sets. The goal is to have some form breakdown, but not enough to where it completely goes to trash, right? That's the idea. And everybody talks about form and injury and, you know, your technique and how that's correlated with getting injured and getting hurt. And people think it's just because of poor form. And the people that are biomechanics specialists and stuff like that, it's great. It serves a purpose because form talks about how efficient the movement becomes, how much force production using the most muscle mass and leverages is part of a lot of sports. That's where it belongs, right? But the idea that if you don't have perfect form, you get injured is kind of a farce. Not kind of, it is a farce. And it's also kind of a lie. As you get stronger and you attempt heavier intensity sets, especially as you go to technical failure, your form will break down. They have studies comparing, you know, sub 60% work versus, above 85% work for the same movement patterns. But guess what? It shifts the dynamic and you actually use different muscle groups slightly different. I know it seems kind of counterintuitive or it doesn't make a ton of sense, but you have to recruit other muscle fibers. And we can get down into the dirty and talk about, you know, everybody's built up of different muscle fibers and different muscle groups. It varies largely across all spectrums. So, but I digress on that side. Form and injury, or technique and injury, are correlated in the sense that when you move out of a pattern that you have trained, and then you start recruiting other muscle groups and maybe that technique changes, guess what? The dynamic changes. Guess what? You're using muscles at leverages that they haven't been used before. So if you're not training that, it does predispose you to a elevated risk of injury. It does not mean you're going to get injured, but if you are all of a sudden, let's change how I word this. If you all of a sudden change how you do the exact same movement, but you're in a less mechanically efficient form, technique, whatever you want to call it, with the same load, that means those stressors are amplified. They're even greater than they were prior. And those muscles have not seen, and those joint ranges have not seen that amount of load in that context ever, right? So, thus, there's two ways to get injured: doing too little for too long, doing too much too quickly. Usually one leads to the next, right? That's why these weekend warriors and stuff like that seem to potentially have an elevated risk of injury. So that's my way to connect the dots, because when I say form doesn't matter, I guess I'm not saying that at all. In fact, I don't think I've actually ever said that. It's what that form has been exposed to, for how long, how much, and how is the load management aspect of that. As soon as your form changes, the load management dynamic changes entirely. So all of a sudden, boom, you might experience an elevated risk of injury. Now, that's where programming comes into play, that, hey, I'm going to start doing this block of 87.5%, 92.5% of my 1 rep max. Or I'm going to start pushing those RPEs or the RIRs. I'm going to have a block where I'm really pushing one set really hard, and I'm trying to almost elicit the want to change my form, but I'm going to attempt to keep the form the best that I can. Okay. Does that make sense, guys? I'm trying to find a way to connect these dots because there's so much misinformation that your technique is overly important when it's not necessarily the technique, but the load management on said technique and how that changes in an instant. And the best way to prepare for that is to slowly expose yourself to it. So that's a spiel on form and technique in regards to injury. Form is dynamic and fluid. It is meant to be a tool, okay? So if you tend to get really poor lockouts on bench press, or you get stuck in the middle of a bench press, you want to hammer a tricep dominant technique. So that is going to be where a close grip variation comes in, a close grip football bar comes in, or Swiss bar, sorry. And that is a different technique, and it's a different form, and you're going to change how much weight you use in that context, because you cannot expect to do a 225 5x5 with your comp grip versus a close grip unless you just somehow have wildly outlandish triceps comparative to your regular bench, and that's a whole different story. But let me know what you guys think. If you disagree, I'm more than happy to have a conversation, not an argument about it, because that's where people get shitty, and that's where nobody wins. It's about having conversations, guys. So thank you, have a good day, and we'll see you lifting.